See, Carl Jung, he was kind of Manichaean in his approach, and he tended towards thinking that evil, in some sense, was a separate entity. You know, and I thought about that for a long time because there's a potency about evil that just can't be brushed away. And I mean this most practically, as I've said, like for people in my clinical practice, I've dealt with many people who are touched by malevolence, and there's no other way of stating it properly. And this happens a lot to people who have post-traumatic stress disorder. Like, they encountered someone that wanted to hurt them for the sake of hurting them. You know, it wasn't some misunderstanding. You can forget about that. It wasn't that at all. And so, to deny the reality of evil, in some sense, I think is the ultimate in naivety. Even though it's a word that you won't hear used, for example, very often in universities anymore. But I just can't understand that at all. But I thought about that a lot, and so I'm going to kind of answer that question by hitting it scattershot. The first thing is that there's an idea, and this happens in Milton, that comes across in Milton, that distance from God is hell. Right? That hell doesn't actually have any, I mean, no, it's ambivalent in Milton, but the fundamental claim seems to be that the farther you get from God, the more it's hell. And then there's another idea that Milton's Satan, who's Lucifer, the bringer of light, right? He's God's highest angel, gone most wrong. And I kind of think about him as the spirit of rationality, of intelligence. It's not because I'm not an admirer of intelligence, because hooray for intelligence, but one of the things that Milton seemed to cotton on to before the rise of modern totalitarian states was that intellect has the capacity to fall in love with its own creations and to elevate them to the highest place, which is basically a totalitarian claim. It's like, what I know is everything that needs to be known, and if it was only manifest in the world would become a utopia. And I also think that's, and we'll talk about this next week, I also think that that's the core idea behind the Tower of Babel. Remember, the Tower of Babel is raised by human beings so that the pinnacle will hit heaven. And so it's the idea that we can build a structure that makes the transcendent unnecessary. And so, okay, so there's those two things. And then there's an idea of free will that's associated with it too. And it seems to me that in order for there to be good, there has to be evil. And so I think the answer is something like this, is that in order for there to be being, there has to be limitation. In order for there to be good, there has to be the possibility of evil. I think the right path is to exist such that the possibility of evil remains open, but that you choose the good. And I don't think that evil per se is built into the structure of the world. I do think that that's human. I think that evil is human. And I think it's understandable. I did a lecture that's online about the distinction between evil and tragedy. And tragedy seems to be built into the structure of the world, and perhaps you can blame God for that. I mean, it doesn't seem to me that it's your fault that there are earthquakes, for example. But it is not obvious to me either that it's tragedy that takes the spirit out of people. I think that human beings are actually equipped to deal with tragedy, but we're not equipped to deal with malevolence. That destroys people. And so I think that metaphysically speaking, the world is structured so that people have a choice between good and evil. And so then the next question is why do we have a choice? And that's where my knowledge runs out. Like the alchemists, for example, speculated that, and the Orthodox Christians also follow this line of reasoning, is that human beings in some sense are furthering creation by our actions and by our choices. And I think there's something to that. It's like creation is unfinished in some sense, and that we're participating in moving it in whatever direction it is that we want to move it. And part of that is that we have free will, and part of that is that we have the choice between good and evil. And that's also all associated with the significance, and maybe the cosmic significance of our lives. And that strikes me as plausible. And I think the weight of responsibility that people feel existentially is an indication of that. So that's about the best I could do with that. So.